Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Revernos. In today's video, we'll be talking about interest rates and the impact that could have on the tech sector. This is a technology channel, so what we'll be doing is using Python to analyze the interest rate data and seeing what's been going on in the interest rate world recently. We'll be talking about the actions of the Federal Reserve, and I'll show you how you can use Python to both pull and slice interest rate data so that you can come to your own conclusions and you don't need to rely on what these articles are saying. If you've been reading or watching the news recently, then I know you're aware that there have been a lot of layoffs in the tech sector recently. Intel announced a 15% reduction in its workforce, which is 15,000 jobs, and Cisco also announced that they're laying off 7% of their employees. Cisco laid off more than 4,000 in February. Inflation and higher interest rates are often cited as one of the reasons. When interest rates go up, it becomes more expensive for companies, including large tech companies, to borrow, which means they can't grow as fast and can often mean that they have to reduce the size of their workforce. So what I'll do in this video is show you where you can get interest rate data, and then we're going to slice the data, and we're actually going to do some analytics on it using Pandas so that you can come to your own conclusion about what's going on with interest rates so you can better understand the impact that that can have in your life. So let's go download our data, and then we'll open the Jupyter Notebook and dive right in. To download our data, we'll start at Google. We'll Google Federal Reserve Economic Data, which is known as FRED for short, and then we'll go to FRED website and we'll search for the federal funds rate, which is the interest rate. The federal funds rate isn't exactly the interest rate that you can get when you go to borrow from a financial institution. The federal funds rate is the rate that financial institutions charge other financial institutions when they lend to them. Interest rates that you'll be charged on, say, a mortgage, or if you get in a bond yield, or if you're getting a credit card, will be higher than the federal funds rate. But the federal funds rate is one of the largest drivers of those other interest rates that I mentioned. There's a lot of more economic and financial theory that goes into that we won't get into this video. But in this video, we'll just be focusing on the federal funds effective rate. So we'll download this data. Make sure you take this date parameter. We'll set this back to actually the maximum, which goes back to July 1954. And then we're in October now, so we'll pull data through September. So go ahead and click download and make sure you put this into the same location as the Jupyter Notebook that we'll launch. And I'll see you in our development environment so we can actually start analyzing our data. The first line of code we're going to include will just import the pandas library, and we'll use the alias PD, which is the standard alias often used when you import pandas. And then we're reading our data. We'll use the pandas read CSV function. I renamed my data from FFD to federal funds rate data.csv, and then read it in using this read CSV function. We'll be answering 4 questions about the federal funds rate during this video. The first is, what is the current federal funds rate? Is the federal funds rate high by historic standards? When is the last time the federal funds rate was this high? And has the federal funds rate started to decrease? And of course, all of this is as of September 30th, 2024. So if you're watching this in the future, things could be different and likely will be. And we'll talk about why later on in this video. But first, what is the current federal funds rate? That's what we'll answer in this video. The first question we will answer is, what is the current federal funds rate? And to do that, we'll look at the columns that are in our data set, and we'll see that we have a date and the DFF, which is our federal funds rate column. So what we want to do is get the most recent date and see what is the DFF, or federal funds rate, for that corresponding value. So we'll copy the name of our data frame, which is data, and we'll set a filter for when date matches the most recent date, or the maximum date, in our data frame. So it should be called data. And this just gives us a data frame of our most recent date. And then once we have that, we actually need to get this particular DFF field. So we'll just say DFF. And then this gives us the most recent federal funds rate that is available in our data set, which is 4.83%. This gives us our starting point for being able to answer the next few questions, which is our federal funds rate high by historic standard? And what we'll do for this is compare the current federal funds rate to the average for the data that we have, which is 1957 to 2024, and we can compare the current rate to the average over this period and see are we actually high by historic standards and see what's going on here. So let's do that next. We'll start by using a pretty simple definition by historic standards. We're just going to look at the average federal funds rate and then see how that compares to the modern rate. So if we were to take a look at our data, we're going to look at the federal funds rate, which is that DFF column, and simply take the mean of that. We can see that the average federal funds rate is actually 4.6%, and we're currently at 4.83. So if we just take this number and divide by that, we can see we're sitting about 4%, 5% higher than the average historical federal funds rate. So we are higher, but not by a ton. And so what we've been seeing is actually a historically low period of the federal funds rate, and now we've reverted to slightly above the historic average. But what if we just want to look at the recent average, let's say over the last 20 years or the past 40 years? We'll take a look at the last 20 years and then the same methodology will apply for the last 40, so we can see are we much higher than the average over the past 20 years. In order to accomplish this, we'll have to do a filter, and we'll filter our data based on the date being greater than or equal to 20 years ago, which in this case will be 2004, which will be October of 2024, and make sure you're doing this in the same date format as expected in your data. So we'll filter the greater than or equal to the start of 20 years ago. Then we'll pull the federal funds rate column and take the mean of that. And we can see that the mean over the past 20 years is actually 1.6%. So if we compare that to our current rate of 4.83%, we're actually very much significantly higher, about 3 times as high as the average over the past 20 years. The rate was cut very low after the 2008 financial crisis, and it took up until now to get back to that and above that historic average, and that's why we can see that the last 20 years it's been low, but now we're back above the historic average. So now we'll move on to the question of when is the last time the federal funds rate was this high. Alright, so now we'll be looking at when is the last time the federal funds rate was this high. And first, the thing we need to get is our most recent date that we have in our data, which will be, we'll go to the date column and just get the max that exists there. And then we can print our most recent date just so we can see exactly what that value is. The other thing we need to do is get the most up-to-date rate. So we'll call this our most recent rate, and we'll cast this to a float, which is just a numerical value with decimals. And we'll get the rate for the last month and that we have in our data. This is actually at the daily level, so the last day we have in our data. So if it matches that most recent date, we'll get the rate from there. And then we'll get the DFF, which is the federal funds rate value. It looks like I'm missing the parentheses somewhere, so let's find that. Yes, and we can print that most recent rate now. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to filter our data. We want to get all of the data before the most up-to-date data point, and then we want to filter for everything that's greater than the most recent rate so that we can see which values are actually higher than where we are now. So to do that, we can subset our data. The first filter will be when the date is less than the most recent date. And then the second filter will be when the rate is greater than the most recent rate. So if we run this, we can see the most recent date we have is September 30th, 2024, and the current rate is 4.83. And we can actually see that on September 18th, the rate was 5.33. So there's actually a rate cut recently, and we can see that reflected in the data here. So this actually answers our next question. Has the federal funds rate started to decrease as of September 30th, 2024? Since we can see that the rate is already starting to come down, I won't show you how to answer the last one. We've definitely covered enough in this video where you can do that. So the last thing I'll leave you with is to like, comment, and subscribe. We have a lot of great content on our channel. We have playlists about Python, analytics, machine learning, Raspberry Pis, data visualization, AWS, and a lot more. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think about this different kind of video format. So like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.